What do you get when you mix Jim from The Office doing his best Ryan Reynolds impression, Ryan Reynolds himself, a Michael Scott monster, and a corporate-washed Hallmark-level writer's room who wished they could have made a Monsters, Inc. sequel instead of whatever this garbage was? I'm gonna kill myself! But you know they're likely far too incompetent to handle such a task. If you said the answer is the movie If.
And Mom said too much candy isn't good for your tummy, but I said... Oh my God.
You'd be thoroughly correct in my eyes. Now, the scores for this film range from a 50% on Rotten Tomatoes, ranging all the way up to about 90% on Fandango. Now, we all know that Rotten Tomatoes and other sites have often found ways to artificially boost the ratings
Talk to your doctor about Viagra.
of poorly reviewed films in order to generate more ticket sales. And when you see a smattering of reviews from different sites with this large of a differential, you have to ponder a couple things. A, the quality of the film in question. B, the quality of the review sites in question. I've now seen the movie If in theaters for myself, and with an 87% average on Fandango, yeah, I'm thinking Fandango is pretty desperate to sell tickets, seeing as that's the second half of their dying business model. But what about the 50% on Rotten Tomatoes? Personally, when I see a really poor score like this on Rotten Tomatoes, it's one of two things. Rotten Tomatoes simply couldn't find a method to boost ratings, or the studios didn't drop them any backdoor cash or promotional funding behind closed doors to artificially enhance the rating for them. I think that's the second half of Rotten Tomatoes' business model, if you ask me. Now, with all this ratings nonsense out of the way, let's talk about the actual movie and why I'm leaning heavily towards the Rotten Tomatoes score when it comes to reviewing this film. Now, If is a live action and partially animated feature film starring Ryan Reynolds and Cailey Flemming, with Steve Carell rounding out our main trio of characters in the cast. These three are really the only thing stopping you from walking out of this film halfway through, because it is quite literally flat out boring and nonsensical. I mean, it's for kids, right? But in the worst way possible. And I want to know, guys, I really want to know, when did the "it's for kids, shut up" thing become a motto adopted by the actual writers themselves? I really thought that this was typically used as a poor attempt of internet neckbeards trying to shut you up whenever you don't gag on the metaphorical shaft of their favorite shitty films.
This is a film about space wizards intended for children.
That's a mouthful. Now, it's apparently become an acceptable mindset to have in Hollywood when handling a movie that costs a measly $110 million to make. I've simply never understood this logic. Would it not be a better idea to craft a story that enthralls both halves of the movie-going audience? Remember, the target market for this film is children with families, so you better make sure your movie lives up to the intelligence quotient of both the kids and the parents. Mom and dad not only have to drive their kids to the theater, but they have to waste 2 hours of their lives on a horseshit film just so Tina and Timmy can point and laugh at silly monsters. If you put the actual effort in to make an all-quadrant film that is respected and enjoyed by adults and kids alike, you might actually have some cultural impact, and you might actually have a box office hit on your hands. But when you get lazy and you don't really give a shit and you just want to make a fun kids movie, you end up with If.
Oh my God.
My eyes can taste it.
Imagine if you could have both halves of the audience enjoying the film. You might be doubling your money at the end of the day. And Hollywood really needs to double their money right now, but just not when it comes to budgets. And speaking of budgets, guys, there's no way this film should have cost $110 million. I'm thinking we get rid of half the irrelevant, overpriced celebrity voice cast, and the movie's probably now sitting at around $80 million instead. I say this because even the highest paid voice actor in this film, likely Steve Carell, who voices the main animated character Blue, didn't really have any positive impact on my viewing experience of the film. This has to be Michael Scott's least memorable character of all time.
Michael, do not let your imagination run amok.
Run what?
And this is sad to hear, but what's even more sad is that the most memorable characters in the film are just side characters, and even they're forgotten.
They're sucking the oxygen out of the room.
Honestly, Doc, if this is how it's going to be, I'm just going to wheel myself back and plug in.
By most of the plot. And even with their charm, this movie's not going to sell any toys or have any important lasting effect on any sort of culture. Now, our main character, B, played well enough by Cailey Flemming, is our window into the world of the Ifs, the imaginary friends. We start the film with the most on-the-nose basic Hallmark plot and character exposition montage that serves to set up the motivations for our character. I think the filmmakers wanted this sequence to play out in a much more dramatic way. Think of the movie Up, where the beginning of the film is the backstory about the husband and how he lost his wife. This film really utilizes the montage sequence to drive home an emotional impact and set you up for the motivations and the ideas behind the character of the grandpa. Now, this film wanted to do that, but with B, with the girl. However, this was more like a Walmart or Wish.com version version of it. The montage shows you a young version of B enjoying life with her late mother, who we find out passed away from cancer by the end of the sequence. Now, something else that is absolutely, oh my God, mind-blowingly stupid that happens in this intro sequence that really keys you into the writing and the IQ and the intentions of and just the storytelling ability of the writers behind the film happens in the intro. Something just insanely stupid happens in this intro, but I'm going to touch on that right at the end of this video because that's how I wrote this script. So stay tuned. But anyways, right away with this sequence, the writers begin to reveal their supreme incompetency by dropping a bar so terrible that not even Vanilla Ice would try to copy it. Now, in the opening of this scene, the movie tells us that, it literally says this. I think B says this or the mother character says this. Anyways, one of them said, the narrator says, the most important stories are the ones we tell ourselves. Now, I'm all for sentimental bullshit that relates to the theme of the film when it's at least done with some intelligence and care. But this flat out does not make any sense. I personally have never been impacted emotionally by any story that I've told myself. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's the stories that we share with others that are the most important and the most impactful. In fact, when we find people telling stories to themselves, it's usually to cover up some sort of unhealthy cognitive dissonance. This film either wants us to put a positive spin on absolute delusion, or it's so far up its own ass that it can't even smell the shit anymore. I'm willing to bet on the second one. Now, I understand they are basically trying to justify the idea of imaginary friends and tie that theme together with a nice Hallmark-shaped bow, but it comes off as clunky and heavily inauthentic when you watch the film. A better line for this would have been something like, the most important friend you can have is your own creativity. Or, the most important stories are the ones that bring our imaginations to life. Boom, I got chills saying that out loud. And I'm not even a writer, okay? And I'm pretty sure those lines were still kind of shitty, but they get the job done much better without trying to sound so pretentious. They actually make sense. I feel like just nothing in this movie makes sense. And when you find yourself 2 minutes into a movie, rewriting the lines in your head and you're not even a film writer, that just goes to show the quality of the storytelling right off the bat. At its very core. I didn't experience any kind of this head-scratching confusion and conflict in my head when I was watching films like Shrek or Monsters, Inc., two other films, by the way, also made for kids. The difference is they were made intelligently and they were made for everyone else with a higher brain cell count as well. Right off the bat, I knew this film was doomed at its very core, just from the intro. And I haven't even told you about the worst part of the intro yet. Stay tuned for that. Now, after B goes through the trauma with the tragic passing of her mother in the intro, we discover that the father is now also experiencing health issues, being put up in a hospital room awaiting a heart surgery. We never learn his actual name. He's played by John Krasinski, who's listed as Dad in the credits.
I don't think any of them actually know my real name.
So that's as much thought that they gave to his character. He's simply just happy-go-lucky Chad Dad. So we'll just call him Tuna.
Hey, Big Tuna. You're single, right?
Mm-hmm. And speaking of Tuna, there was something fishy about this character right away, as I felt Jimbo here was doing his best impression of Ryan Reynolds.
Desperate.
If this was done on purpose, I kind of understand why by the end of the film, but something about Tuna's acting just felt very forced for me. Likeable, sure, but forced nonetheless. Anyways, Tuna just kind of stays the whole film as the stagnant, optimistic dad and has very little impact on the actual plot. It's hilarious because even the writers knew his scenes were the least interesting because half the time they seem to be cut short. I mean, at one point in the film, the daughter, B, walks into his hospital room, gives him flowers, tells him she got a job, and then immediately leaves so the plot can move forward. No conversation was had. About 15 seconds maximum was spent inside the hospital room in this scene. Now, I don't know about you, but if I make the trip all the way to the store for flowers, then all the way to the hospital to see my dying dad, potentially dying dad, I'm intending to have a real full conversation with my potentially dying father. It just came off so rushed and tacky, and these scenes left me feeling very disconnected with the film. Not a good idea. Not a good vibe when you're going for an emotional weight. Now, let's talk about the ifs and the ands and the buts. But the ifs, okay, the IFs, the imaginary friends, hence IF. You know, I thought I was smart, but it actually took me a lot longer to put that together. I don't know why. The ifs are led by a mysterious man named Cal, played by Ryan Reynolds, who only B can see. He's like a real human imaginary friend. He's not animated, I guess. Although Ryan Reynolds is arguably an animated actor in and of himself, but that's just a joke. All right, jokes aside, Ryan is the best part of every movie he's in, so naturally he steals the show.
Do you want to know why? No, it's memorable.
Although there is a really emotional scene where the young actress who plays B clearly outclasses Ryan when it comes to faking tears. And it's just kind of hilarious to see them on screen when it feels like they're acting in two different versions of the movie. I'm patting the child girl actress on the back if you couldn't tell. She did a fine job. She's not really the problem with this film. I didn't really get anything from the character of Cal from Ryan Reynolds other than, hey, look, it's funny charisma man, Ryan Reynolds. So we're just going to call him Ryan throughout the script. If he wasn't in this movie, though, and they cast an inferior, less entertaining actor, I believe this could be a nearly unwatchable nightmare of a movie. So props to Ryan Reynolds for doing something, for salvaging something in this script. So for what it's worth, he carries the film, and as always, he's an easily likable on-screen presence, as expected. And speaking of likable actors, we have Steve Carell playing Blue, who's actually purple, who really falls flat for me in this movie. Not only are his jokes absolutely unmemorable, I literally can't remember any joke outside of the fact that he sneezes and breaks things.
How'd it go?
Oh my God.
His voice acting struck me as his most generic work to this day. And you really could have hired a more talented voice actor for half, even 20% of the budget that you used on Steve and gotten double your money's worth just by doing that. I mean, it's just mind-boggling that they spend all this money on celebrities to sell the film, yet it seems to make the actual movie no better for doing so. It's like a mediocre chocolate bar with a solid gold wrapper. Sure, people might buy it, but as soon as the first person takes a bite, they're gonna let everyone else know it actually tasted like horse shit. And there was no golden ticket. That's what this movie is at its core. It's a homeless man wearing Versace. Cool, you've got a nice coat, but you still have to shit in the grass and wipe your hands with a dirty rag you found in the dumpster. Weird metaphors, I know. It's just how I feel about this one. Now, the other main imaginary friend, who is really more of a completely forgettable side character, Blossom, this fucking abomination, is played by nobody's favorite voice actor, the most hated part of the failed Han Solo prequel herself, Phoebe Waller, franchise bridge burner. Now, I don't think I could find a single person in the entire theater that would tell me they can't wait to see the If movie because Phoebe Waller-Bridge is voice acting a forgettable side character in the Wish.com version of Monsters, Inc.
Hello? Hello, how are you? There's a door here.
I mean, why are we continuing to overspend on overhyped Hollywood talent when it serves no purpose in making the movie better or more marketable? I'm losing my mind just trying to justify it from a movie fan perspective, let alone a movie making perspective, a marketing perspective. I mean, her character is so forgettable. I'm just going to stop writing anything else about it right now. I simply forget everything about her character outside of the fact that she's a ballerina bug thing and likes to perform synchronized swimming. Yes, that is a sequence in the film at one point for some reason. I mean, it's fun at least, I guess. Anyways, speaking of piss poor sequences, the centerpiece of this film was definitely when Ryan and the girl visit a theme park where they sneak in and go underground to the secret headquarters of all the imaginary friends. This makes no sense, but let's just push the logistics aside and talk about the core of it. It basically ends up turning into a glorified music video, and then when we leave, this location doesn't really become too much more relevant again for the rest of the film. There was one redeeming factor in the sequence, and it's a visual effect that I've truly never seen done before, and it was done so well that it actually blew my mind. At one point, Ryan's character Cal is being ushered through these different themed areas of the imaginary world. You got a beach, you got a concert, you got a swimming pool, you got like an ancient Greek-like building area, like I don't know, Zen gardens, an art professor's office. So he's climbing out of a painting in the art professor's office from a beach. And the way they have his character morph out of the painting and then become part of reality, and then the painting like sticks on him, it was such a crazy trippy effect that I was like, holy shit, they pulled off something brilliant in this movie. Now, it's just a 5-second special effect, but look, I'm taking everything I can get from this film. Although I can go watch 50 Zach King videos on Instagram and get the same effect without having to drag my ass to a shitty kids movie just to experience it. Now, I'm not going to go full spoiler or plot breakdowns here because to me, it's just not worth the effort, but I'll speak briefly now about the rest of the film and my thoughts on the movie as a whole. The story ends up becoming driven by the idea that the Ifs, the imaginary friends, need to find new real-world kid partners to pair up with as friends, similar to how Monsters, Inc. has the creatures pairing up with kids as well, but this film's approach is just far less entertaining. Ryan ends up recruiting B, the little girl, to help pair all the Ifs with kids, and their pursuit of this goal ensues throughout the second and third act of this film. We start with a little Asian boy who she met at the same hospital where her dad was, and her first mission is to pair an imaginary friend with him, but she interviews all the characters and tries to show them all to the kid, but he just can't see them. He just doesn't have it in him to see the imaginary friends for whatever reason. Now, throughout this mission, we get beat over the head with Bia's character arc harder than a bag of bricks that was clearly dropped on top of the writers' room's heads before writing the script. And at the start of her arc, she tells her father that she's not a kid anymore. And she says this multiple times, almost directly at the audience. Halfway into the film, she completes this arc and proceeds to tell us, again, multiple times, in multiple very obvious ways, she actually is a kid and she wants to be a kid. I'm not kidding. She basically states this exact same thing about 4 different times in 4 different scenes. I mean, we get it. She's a kid now. She was always a kid. The most incompetent thing about this film, however, is the main mechanic of the ifs. At one point, Ryan and Bea find out that the real goal should not be to find new children for the ifs, but to pair them up with their old friends. You know, the adults who were once kids with these imaginary friends. To do this, they must ignite the youthful energy and emotions within the old, grown-up adult versions of the kids who were once paired with these imaginary friends. The effort made to convey this idea effectively was just sadly quite sorely lacking. For example, one of the ifs needs to be paired up again with this obese, neck-bearded adult businessman played by SNL's Bobby Moynihan, who, by the way, the imaginary friend looks at him and says, "Wow, how fit and healthy does he look? He's amazing." So this film also serves to tell child audiences that if you grow up to be a fat ass with a neck beard, that you're actually just really fit and healthy and amazing. Great messaging, Hollywood. So anyways, this neckbeard guy that they're trying to pair up an imaginary friend with is played by SNL's Bobby Moynihan. His character is nervous and he's getting ready for a meeting and he heads into an office building. And so Bea and the imaginary friends follow suit. So let's break this down. What does Bea actually do to re-engage his childlike sense of wonder and bring forth his imaginative spirit so that he can again connect with his imaginary friend? What does she do? Let's think about this guy. He's a fat old neckbeard dude with an office job. And they met him prior at a bakery. This and the fact that he's a fat fuck clue Bea in to the fact that he might enjoy pastries. So what does she do? She brings a box of freshly baked pastries to the office and sits next to Bobby right before his big meeting. As expected, big old Bobby boy gets one whiff of this fresh pastry and his childhood memories come washing back. Did he live in a bakery? Is his whole childhood based on eating croissants? I don't understand. This was mind-blowingly lazy and on the nose and stereotypical and just terribly toxic of the writers to make the fat guy in the movie have his childhood reinvigorated by a croissant. Oh my God, I lost my mind when this happened. And this is, to be honest, where I almost walked out. And I actually saw a few couples walk out of the movie right after this happened as well. Just hilarious, baffling. So he smells the croissant. He climaxes almost at the same time that his imaginary friend is reconnecting with him and they're both glowing gold, and then it fails. But then he walks up to the meeting and right before he goes in, he takes a breath, closes his eyes, and the imaginary friend taps him on the shoulder and they reconnect and climax together before he goes into his meeting. I don't know. It's the weirdest thing. None of it makes any sense. Did the croissant actually cause the reconnection? Or was it something else? I don't know. And why do you give the fat guy a croissant? How stupid can you? I mean, it makes sense, but it's just so dumb at the same time. I'm losing my mind. Now, if you need any more reason to understand why this film is a giant pile of shit, I'm going to leave you off with 2 things that clued me into the quality of the story immediately when watching it for myself. And we're going to circle back to the intro of the film, like I said in the beginning of this video, and I'm going to let you discover the most outrageous choice by the writers yet in this film. And it happens at the beginning. So let's talk about that right now. At the start of the film, during the wannabe up style montage sequence, I shit you not, the mother character literally breaks the 4th wall like this in the movie. She looks at the camera and she winks after saying something. Now, this has no impact on the story really, and it's never really brought up or addressed again. Like the 4th wall breaking is not a theme of this script. It's just there in the intro for shits and giggles, just to be, look, cool, 4th wall break. Isn't that clever? Now, I'm not sure who made this a reality in the script, but it reeks of misunderstanding and amateur. It reeks of amateur body odor. A writer's room filled with stinky little amateurs. Now, breaking the 4th wall is cool, but not because it's cool just to do, you know? It's like the homeless man wearing Versace. It's not cool when the homeless man wears it. It's cool when, like, I don't know, Gary Oldman or somebody like that. It's cool when they do it, okay? Anyways, why is breaking the 4th wall a good idea? Well, it's a good idea when it's ingrained in the DNA of the story and used throughout to really hammer home the script and give us insight to the characters, bringing us into their world in a new way. Think House of Cards, earlier seasons with Kevin Spacey. Think Deadpool with our very own Ryan Reynolds from this movie. Those stories are centered around the idea that we're going to be in the character's mind. And so it makes sense to use that as a tool in the script. They just toss it in the intro of this movie because someone thought it was cool. That's the level of writing of this film. Now, what's the second thing? What's the second biggest thing that that really made me come away from this film thinking, holy shit, the writer's room are all sharing the same brain cell? Well, I'll tell you. We just circled back to the beginning, but now let's go all the way to the end. Spoiler warning. And oh boy, is this supremely terrible. To put it in a nutshell, Bee comes home after a long day adventuring the city with her imaginary friends to find her grandma in shambles, nearly tearing up. Her grandma tells her that something has gone wrong with her father and they need to go to the hospital immediately. The grandma is nearly in tears. Something's gone horribly wrong. So naturally, instead of driving there, Bee runs out the door and somehow sprints to the hospital and beats her grandma.
New this morning, a random punching attack on a 74-year-old woman in Midtown.
To the father's hospital room. Okay, fine. She enters and strangely, in a heavily confusing and contrasting manner, a nurse tells Bee that her father simply had a long day and he's taking a nap. Okay. He looks fine. He's healthy. He's clearly not on any life support or anything of the sort. He's clearly not in danger. He's clearly just having a good old snooze. Now, for whatever reason, Bee still believes her grandma, and she begins to tell her dad, she breaks down by the side of her dad's bed and she begins to tell her dad about how her character arc is now complete and she wants to be a kid again and it's all she ever wanted, and some other nonsense about storytelling, which is clearly trying to make a poor and obvious attempt to tie up the messaging from the intro sequence, which was also piss poor. Now, because we know the father is a bit of a prankster, I left this part out, but at one point he hides in the hospital room closet after leaving his daughter a fake note saying he went for lunch, and she playfully discovers him. So we know he's a bit of a prankster. And because we know the writers lack the balls to kill him off, Big Tuna here is clearly faking his nap. So at the end of her tragic monologue, you guessed it, Jimbo here wakes up, confirming our immediate suspicions, and surprises the daughter. Turns out he was fine all along, and the surgery on his heart went perfectly fine. Now, this is absolutely the worst part of the film, and it breeds far too many questions. Why did the grandma lie to the girl about the reality of her father's situation? Did someone else lie to the grandma too? Was she in on the joke? Clearly the nurse wasn't really in on it, so does that mean that the father organized this whole shebang just so we can have a cringe character arc conclusion and a surprise ending? I highly doubt that this uplifting, ever-positive super Chad dad would deliberately and even maliciously pull a prank on his daughter that would compromise her emotional state to such a degree. I'm really seriously struggling to understand this bizarre sequence of events crafted by the writers. I could rewrite this ending 10 ways to Sunday, most of them having Jimbo here end up dead, but I've already wasted far too much time writing this review, so I'm not going to spend a second more talking about this lackluster Hollywood corporate product than I need to. And speaking of time, it's time for me to go, and I hope this video has helped save your time by preventing an unneeded trip to the theater. Take your kids to see Planet of the Apes or something else instead. Honestly, you're gonna have a lot better of a time. And that movie's still got some issues too, but far better experience. I digress. This has been Stark Cinema. I love you guys. 3000. I'll see you on the next video.